lot on tap this week and next week. And joining me now to talk more about stocks and where we go from here is Kenny Polcari. He's partner and chief market strategist at SlateStone Wealth. Kenny, great to have you on the show this morning, joining us remotely. But stocks right near a record high. What's your take?
Listen, I think they're record high. It's great. It feels good, but I think they're toppy. I think the market's a little bit tired. I think if you look at the S&P and you look at NASDAQ, you look at the Mag 7, they're all in the overbought territory when you look at the relative strength index, which just signals caution. Doesn't signal disaster. It just signals, listen, stocks have gotten a little bit ahead of themselves. Don't be surprised if we see a little bit of a pullback. We're also coming into August, and as you know, Kristen, August can be kind of a volatile, slow month because a lot of people are away, both in Europe and the U.S., and so markets can be a little bit more volatile because volumes are lower.
Yeah. Look, we've seen quite a bit of volatility this year, and before that August month rolls around, we'll have a lot more to digest, whether it's in regards to trade, earnings season. We can talk more about earnings in a moment, as well as that Fed decision on tap next week. Kenny, earnings, what's in focus for you as we start to hear from some of these major tech companies that we do know drive a bulk of the action in the S&P 500?
So that's top of mind, right? It's going to be the coming tech earnings. It starts tomorrow really with Tesla and Google, and then into next week we'll get the others. But it's going to be all about the AI demand, what the outlook is, what's driving it. Let's listen. Taiwan Semi came out last week. They had a very, very bullish report. They talked about how demand is increasing. They're preparing for increased demand. And so investors really want to know how AI is going to continue to drive the growth in these tech companies. So that's where my focus is. In addition, you got things like, all these earnings that start today from big names, Coca-Cola, General Motors, all that stuff. But notice they're all beating on the top and bottom lines, but the reactions have been muted. And I think part of that is because a lot of investors feel like we're at a high and they expect to see a pullback. And so there's a little bit kind of a muted reaction. Yeah,
I do want to talk about trade. Just less than a half hour ago, Kenny, we had seen Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent with the headline saying that the August 12th China tariff deadline likely is to be extended with talks planned in Stockholm. How does that factor in to the path for equities?
That's a great question because it could really go either way. Some people could view it as a failure, that they're kicking the can down the road, that they haven't made a decision, while others will view it as a positive, that Trump's not going to overreact, that the conversations are going well. You need a little bit more time. They're complex agreements. You can't fix them all in 2 weeks or 2 months even. And so I wouldn't necessarily view that as a negative, but I wouldn't be surprised if you start to see the market get a little bit antsy if we also start to see, the EU, which is due to get hit next Friday.
Yeah.
What happens there? Are they gonna oppose it, or are they gonna extend it? I think that's what you kind of have to wait and see. I think the EU, honestly, between the two, is more of an issue for the markets than China is.
Interesting. Treasury Secretary Bessent also saying that Powell doesn't need to resign, but should conduct an internal review. And of course, this comes ahead of that next week Fed decision, where the markets are greatly pricing in the fact that the Fed would just keep rates steady. What does that mean?
Listen, I think rates should stay steady. I think if you look at the hard data in the economy, it continues to be fairly robust. The economy is not falling off the edge. Unemployment actually ticked lower and job creation ticked higher. I think the economy is okay where it is. I don't think Jay Powell should resign at all. Although I have to tell you, I think they're going to put a lot of pressure on him if he doesn't cut rates in July, which I don't think he's going to. I think the market doesn't expect it either. I think you're just going to have Trump and a bunch of other people that are vying for his position start to openly put pressure on him to make a decision and either force him to do it or force him out. I think that would be a mistake if they force him out. I think that'll create more chaos in the markets. I think the market is okay with what Jay Powell's doing at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's the general sentiment that we've been gathering, or that has been the interpretation of what we've been hearing from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. But something obviously that the markets will be following closely, Kenny. Another thing that I want to ask you about, obviously, one of the hottest topics on Wall Street is artificial intelligence. And we had seen some of those stocks underperform during the downturn, but of course back now in the spotlight. And in fact, a headline today from CNBC citing Clout Wars, Jensen Huang, NVIDIA CEO, eclipses Elon Musk and Tim Cook in Washington. What does that say about the semiconductor space and who does maybe really have some sticking power in our nation's capital?
Listen, I think you have to lean towards Nvidia and Jensen Huang in terms of, listen, they all have control. Let's not kid each other. They're all there. They're all part of the conversation. But you have to look at how Jensen Huang has gone from, below the belt to now above the belt in terms of kind of his presence and his knowledge and what he brings to the table and what's happening in the AI space. So I think you have to give him credit. While they're all three in the space, I think Jensen Huang has now taken himself, elevated himself to the level where he's at least on par, if not a little bit ahead. And I actually think that's good. I think Washington has to have smart people in the industry helping to guide it where, in terms of where we're going.
Yeah, gold, crypto, I want to get your take on those securities, commodities, if you will. Assets probably is a better word, considering that we might see some volatility ahead in August.
Sure, and look, and gold now has broken out. I've written in my note over the last couple of days that gold was coming to an apex, right? Because it was trading in a really, really tight range. And if you drew the trend lines from the highs down, from the lows up, you saw we were right at the point of the triangle. And it was going to either break out or break down. And in fact, we broke out. And I think part of that is because there's some building nervousness around stocks being fairly priced or overpriced, and some volatile times as we come into August and September, which is normal. So I think we're going to see gold push a little bit higher. 3470, I think, was the high. And I think that's, the most recent high. And I think that's where it's going to test again. Bitcoin, on the other hand, I love it. I own a little bit of it. You never own enough, especially when it's rallying. And so after crypto week during this crypto week that's happening or happened last week, we saw lots of very, very positive commentary and news coming around that crypto industry. I think it's positive. I think people should have some exposure to it, depending on who you are and where you are in the risk scale is going to define how much you have. Certainly a 30-year-old is going to have much more than me at 64, but I think people need to have some exposure to it because I think it's an asset class that's going to continue to explode.
Kenny Polcari, partner and chief market strategist at SlateStone Wealth. Kenny, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.